the reason I felt okay about, getting more open about electoral politics in this particular cycle is that it's not like I want people to be Democrat. I want people to have a political system that has a chance of being responsive to whatever you care about. And that was really the thing that I came to understand in talking to super progressive people as well as, Republican, traditional conservative people, is that the process matters, right? And the structures and the systems that we have to be responsive to us matter. And they're not sufficient. It's not like you vote for Biden Harris and now that you have, a particular president and vice president, that like everything you want happens. Obviously, the big eye-opening thing, at least for me, is that there's so much more like organizing and pressure and like kind of activation that we need to happen. But you also need like a system that responds to that pressure and responds to that organizing, and that, keeps the lights on and like has a bureaucracy that actually functions. So that's kind of what I'm voting for, is the sort of structures that enable us to then organize for the change we want, no matter what that change is. Like, it's still a democratic society. We get to kind of duke out, what ideas will win and, what makes the most sense for all of us. But we need that system. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with it.
As somebody who's liberal living in a very blue state, I often feel like in the general elections and with like the electoral college that my vote is important, but it doesn't really like make that much of a difference versus like people I know in New Hampshire nearby or in other swing states. So I really like this opportunity to be able to write some letters to folks in places where the votes are like really like, okay, like Florida, please go vote. That kind of makes me feel a little less powerless in the situation.
I personally know it would feel super motivating for me to know that, these elections are sometimes so close that like I can or could have made, the difference. It's like, oh, means maybe even if I wonder whether it makes a difference, like, why don't I just put in the effort in case?
In case. Yeah. Like, what can it hurt? You might as well vote.
One thing that will hopefully be, I don't know if fun's the right word, but engaging, particularly engaging, add another element to election night or election week, as it may be, is following particularly the states that I've been writing letters to. So I have almost a new stake or just a new reason to really be, of course, rooting for those swing states to swing blue. In 2016, my best friend did go campaign for Hillary Clinton in Nevada. So it was, I believe Nevada was blue then. So it was pretty exciting to see that, felt like her work there made a difference when we saw that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun for me to think about, like, having been a touring musician and had the privilege of actually like hanging out in every one of these states. It's
Sure.
really fun to think about like the people I've met and, especially times I've gotten to like stay overnight, in their houses when they hosted us, or, gotten to hang out with people afterwards at their favorite hangout spots. Like, I always kind of envision that when I'm writing. And a little shout out to Karen. She's actually been involved in a really cool group called, was it Suffrage Over Silence? That's put together this whole guide on like getting super detailed about like, depending on where you live, they'll give you really good info about how to vote by mail. And it's been super cool to see.
And this might be a question for Melissa, but after this election, how are people still planning on staying involved in politics? Like, what's a way that people can just stay active, even if it's not, even if there's not a huge election upcoming?
Local elections are hugely important. I know we've all been hearing this for years and years and years and years, but I finally actually got involved in local politics a couple years ago. And I have a friend who's been adamant that he hates politics. This very same person told me a few days ago that he just received word that his application for rent relief in New York City, because so many of us have been unemployed for almost 7 months now, that his application for rent relief just got approved. And I said, that's great. I'm very happy for you. And then I casually just mentioned, I said, you know, the guy who wrote that is our state senator, Brad Hoylman. He co-wrote the bill with State Senator Brian Kavanaugh.
Oh my God, he was my state senator for like a while too.
I've cultivated relationships now with both Brad Hoylman and Brian Kavanaugh and our state assemblyman Harvey Epstein and our city council. It's like these people live in the neighborhood and they are fighting day in and day out. And I know this is a much longer answer than you were anticipating, Elena, but I think it's so important to stay involved. More important actually than it is every 4 years. Because on the federal level, we are one of millions and millions and millions. And yes, absolutely, we all need to show up. But at each, I've never waited in line for a local election, not once. You know, you're talking like hundreds of people voting from each district. And then your one vote can represent 1% of the decision makers. It's mind-boggling. Yeah, and also there are a lot of local initiatives, local groups working on, I think I mentioned this last week, on fair representation and redistricting.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been looking into, and I have to thank my friend Scott Kurshige for posting on Facebook about this when I was like sharing some of what I was doing here. And he said, this is great. And I'd also encourage you to think about like, how do you help support organizations that are doing this kind of year round, like year after year. And they have this whole kind of long game of building power, activating people, helping people understand what government does for them, what it currently fails to do, what it could do, and making sure that it's not just when elections roll around that people suddenly pay attention, but that there's already people who kind of are aware and are informed and are willing to be activated to help move everything in the right direction. And I thought that was great. I felt like I can overall support the idea of how do you make sure that communities that are forgotten or neglected or not well served by the system as it is today, how do you make sure that their voices are heard more and more when the people who naturally have power don't think about the things that matter most to these communities. And then another one, a piece of advice that I've seen is just pick one organization. Of course, like you can't do everything and you can't pay attention to everything all the time. For example, people working on climate change, there are some groups that are just organizing to shut a single coal power plant down, in their region or in their community. And that can happen. Like if you can make the case for it and you get the right decision makers feeling enough pressure for it. And so it's kind of cool to sort of like Melissa was saying about local politics, that there are a lot fewer people who are involved in some of those pushes and some of those efforts. And that's really where one new person can make a lot of difference. And I say that not having done it myself, but it's some of the things that I've come across as food for thought for what I can do going forward.
I wanted to say for the people in New York, we've got these community boards, which I didn't even know about. They're appointed, but actually it's relatively easy to get involved volunteering. And then they control a lot of things like local housing and traffic and things like that. So I just found out about them. And if you are in New York and have not heard of community boards, that is an easy way to get involved on a non-activist, but also like impacting of your community end.
I think for me, it's got to do with baby steps. I have a huge propensity for thinking in huge strokes, and I can easily talk myself into the idea that something is too hard. When you guys are talking about like joining small organizations with like very specific goals, I think that one of the most beautiful things about that is it can open doors to other things too. And you might discover things that you either didn't know were going on, or maybe you knew they were going on, but you didn't realize how passionate you were about it until you get closer to it and you come into contact with it. And I think that's kind of how we grow as people, is by just opening one door and seeing where it goes. And even if you're working on something really small, it might lead to things that you never imagined you'd get involved with.
I love that. I feel like the more that I take some of these baby steps, the more I just, again, almost for selfish reasons, I feel like I get so much out of it because I learn just how stuff works, how the world works. It also feels like we're building a foundation of something bigger, right? We're not just determining or helping to get a certain result of one election. We're building a foundation for how the world gets better from here, because there's so many things. Of course, there are so many problems and so many things that are super stressful and so many things that feel like crises and are crises. And it's also this moment where we have the chance to imagine the world we want. And so many movements are building the power to make those beautiful visions happen. And that's honestly what I'm most excited about, not just defeating a thing or managing a thing or getting things back to, you know, some normal that maybe never really existed, but more about the moment we're in and the incredible potential it holds. I really feel like these have helped me to ground myself in that more than anything. So again, so grateful to all of you.